Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as the Comeback Coach. Guys, this is a blessing for me to have a friend of mine on the show. His name is Chris. Not only is he a Marine, not only is he a speaker, not only is he a mentor, but he's a brother in Christ. And I'm so grateful to be able to call him a brother in Christ. We've been through a lot of the same things, addiction, struggling with mental stuff. So we're going to talk about all that. But we're going to talk about how to become a noble warrior. Chris, brother, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Richard. Hey, man, I'm so excited to be here. And, my whole purpose for being here is really just to spread the faith, man. Talk to folks about the idea of being a noble warrior.
So let me ask you, Chris, first question is, because I got a traumatic brain injury. If I don't ask it, I forget. What is your definition of resiliency?
So I work with folks in the Homeland Security world for the last 20 years, and resiliency always comes back to this idea of what I call snap-backitude, your ability to bounce back and to get yourself together. And whatever it is that you've dealt with, is this commitment that when you've been knocked down and you're bleeding, that you got to get back up and you got to get back into the fight. As a matter of fact, that is a huge aspect of the noble.
I love the Marine ethos. I think you guys have the best uniforms, hand down, ever. And I also love that once a Marine, always a Marine. And I love that mentality. But take us back when you were a kid.
I got you snapped. I've got you locked in.
So did you always want to be a Marine?
I did. So I grew up as you might call it a Navy brat. My dad was a fighter pilot in the Navy. And it's like every time we'd go to a Navy base, who was guarding those bases? These big old dudes that were always the guys that drew my attention. And it's like, looking into what those guys were is like something that I knew I always wanted to be. And when I turned 17, a week after I turned 17, I dropped out of high school with my dad's blessing because I wasn't doing too good. And I joined the Marine Corps. So a week after my 17th birthday, I joined the Marine Corps. And I think another week after that, I was in boot camp. And so that started my Marine Corps journey there. I was back in 1981.
Now, did you take to the Marine Corps quickly?
Oh, I did. Yeah, everything about the Marine Corps, the discipline, the meritocracy of the whole thing. In other words, you exceeded and you excelled based on how hard you work. You knew what the things were that you needed to do well. And if you did those well, the Marine Corps was going to promote you, is going to recognize you, was going to award you. And I figured all of that out really early. And so I went from a 17-year-old high school dropout to a commissioned officer, a major in the United States Marine Corps with a master's degree because of this meritocracy, this thing that Marine Corps, if you give them, they're going to return and give it back to you. And this idea of discipline and the warrior ethos, applying that to life, not just the battlefield, but to life and what that does for you. And so I would say that, at 37 years old, at 20 years in, I was a major looking at lieutenant colonel. And it's like, you know what, I'm ready for my next adventure. And so in 2001, in September 2nd, of 2001, I retired from the Marine Corps. I said, I'm going to start a new adventure. And then we all know what happened roughly 10 days later, September 11th of 2001. We were attacked by radical Islam, Al-Qaeda. And on September 12th of 2001, I knew what I was going to be for my next career. I was going to be a counterterrorism intelligence guy. And I was going to work with whatever agency had the responsibility to make sure that that didn't happen again. And so that would start my second 20-year career, working counterterrorism intelligence, working with law enforcement, helping to establish intelligence capabilities domestically, because remember, one of the big problems is nobody was talking to each other. We didn't have the capacity for sharing information, for developing intelligence on what was taking place domestically. And so I got very much involved in developing the Joint Terrorism Task Force and working with fusion centers. And that adventure would take me eventually. Now I'm retired, I'm a civilian, but I would go to Iraq as a counterterrorism advisor to the Iraqi Ministry of Interior. And I would help them to build the capacity that eventually took on Al-Qaeda in Iraq and destroyed them. And we were able to completely eradicate that organization in Iraq. And we did that 2007, 2008. And so, again, my adventure would bring me back, and I would continue to work with local law enforcement back here in the States and training up what we call terrorism liaison officers, and really just kind of putting in place the capacity to move information. If somebody sees something and they want to say something, how are they going to do that? And then how is that information handled and processed, and what do we do about it? And so that was, I would say, for about a decade, I did that. And then I was able to establish to found a company with a partner of mine that just kind of made it more official. We had a company as a Homeland Security consultancy and started to do training and exercises. And again, I just recently retired from that to start this ministry.
All right. So if people are watching and they see you now and you just read off everything that you've done, they would think everything was all unicorns and rainbows.
And lollipops.
Yeah. But you had to go through some hell during this time, your own personal hell.
Yeah. So let's get real, because I just covered all the good stuff, the stuff that I would say if I was teaching a class to you and I was introducing myself to you. The real stuff, the deep stuff, the abyss that I had to walk through. So we all know that when you become a member of the military, you are kind of molded and you are shaped, and your persona kind of becomes part of your uniform, your rank, and your awards, and all that is so important. And now when you do that for 20 years and then you retire and then that's gone, your identity kind of is gone. And there's like this huge hole in your life. Nobody knows you. I mean, in the military, your uniform, your rank, I mean, people can look at you and they can assess, so much about you just by your presentation, right? And then all that's gone. And I had anchored my identity to that as a Marine. Again, 17 years old to 37 years old, that was who I was. And then it was gone. And when that pillar in my life was pulled, my life just kind of collapsed around it. I was still pushing professionally. I was still trying to get stuff done and all those things that I was just talking about. I was able to somehow attend to those things. But in the meantime, I was introduced to drugs, methamphetamines. It's like, well, what a great way for me to get extra hours out of what it is that I was doing. And then it became just something that I needed. And it was for years that I was doing that. I would get divorced from a marriage of 22 years and would get remarried, and then still trying to work through this drug addiction. And eventually I found myself in jail for the drugs. And dude, that was the come to Jesus time. I mean, literally it was, you got to face what you're doing and how your life, you talk about being cut to the stump. I was cut to the stump. And something interesting happened to me. Of course, I prayed. I'm a man of faith since I was 16, but of course, in and out of my faith walk. And I don't know how to describe this, but the vision was kind of comes out like this: is that the idea of the eagle, globe, and anchor. It's the emblem that we wear on our uniforms, and it's important that you keep it. You keep it in shape, and then it's not dirty and rusty and all those things. And the image was of Jesus was holding me out this emblem of the eagle, globe, and anchor, and it would just look like crap. And it's like, you earned this, but now look at the state of it. And then he handed out a Mameluke sword. And this was all in my head. It was all going on in my head. And the Mameluke sword was the sword that I earned when I went from enlisted to officer. And it was all rusty and dusty, and it was in horrible shape. And handing these things out to me in my head was this idea of look what you have allowed yourself to become, because these represent kind of where you are. And it's just like all of the warrior ethos neurons in my head just kind of lit up. It's like, I've got to get you talking about resilience, about getting back up. That was my bottom point. And all of these neurons just kind of lit up. Is I've got to get my act together. I got to get my crap together. And I've got to rebuild my castle. And then at some point, I got to tell my story. And that kind of eventually was a realization that I came to. And out of that, you get this idea of making my warrior again, building my castle again, and then helping other people to slay their dragons. And that became the concept of a course or of a leadership program, a ministry that I put together called the Rites of Passage Leadership Program. And first course is making warriors, building castles is the second course, and then slaying dragons is the third. But all of that came from this really dark episode in my life. And literally one of the reasons why I took on that assignment in Iraq in 2007 was to completely break contact with all of the nonsense that had kind of the darkness that had come into my life, and strap on again as a warrior and go back into the fight. And so that was one of the main reasons, or certainly was a big reason for me to going back into a combat situation. And it squared me away real quick. And it got me thinking about.
Like I said, people that follow me know, I'm very open about my recovery. I'm very open about being a Christian. But I can remember the last time that I ever used or drank. Take us back to the last time that you've ever used methamphetamine. What was that like that last time?
That's a great question. And I don't think I can remember the last time. I just remember that when I was in jail, that would have been after that, no more. That was that point where it was the kick in the pants that we all need at some point. It was that low point. And I'm sure the night before I had been, smoking the meth and got into a fight with my wife the next morning, still probably just out of my mind on meth. And that fight ended up resulting in the police coming and taking me away to jail. So that would have been the last time. And good grief. Yeah.
So now, I had a friend of mine on same thing. And for some reason, God's putting his all into my life the last couple of weeks. I don't know why, but he's in charge. But he said going through withdrawals in a prison cell is not the nicest of experiences. Did you have to go through that?
Rich, I don't remember going through withdrawals. I just remember, so as soon as I got out of jail, and I was probably still cranking, because I was out in about 4 hours. The first thing I did was write to my business partners, write to the folks that my clients, if you will, the folks I was working for in the government, and told them what had happened. And I expected that everything was going to go away. I expected that they would cut with me and then they would never have anything to do with me. But so I didn't go through withdrawals. What I decided to do was to attack the problem. And so I wrote this email out to all of these folks, and the response was just amazing. It's like, we got your back. You're going to get through this. Take a couple days out or a couple weeks off, whatever it takes, and then let's get back at it. So it was completely the opposite. Nobody cut ties with me. Matter of fact, opportunities actually came out of that. And there's almost like sometimes when you just let the light in, when you just tell the truth, something magical happens. And
right. Well, I want to dig a little bit deeper into that real quick, but first I want to thank our sponsors. As you guys know, I was with GNC for over 30 years, did 23 years in the military. Loved pre-workouts, loved coffee, but they all tasted like ass. So I decided to come out with my own coffee called Vertical Momentum Coffee. It's all veteran, hand roasted, and twice the energy, no crash. But the best part is 100% of the proceeds go to help end veteran homelessness and suicide. So if you love coffee and want to help with a mission, help us out. What we're doing is we're actually making it to where 12 single soldiers and 2 soldiers with families can bring their families, and they can get help physically, mentally, spiritually for a whole year at zero cost to the soldier. So if you guys love missions, helping soldiers, let us know, and I'll get you that coffee. And also, as you guys know, I'm diabetic, and I stopped using regular sugar. I started using Buzzy Bee's honey, as you see down below. My sugar has dropped over 240 points. So if you like honey, it is straight from his beehive. He actually is a beekeeper. It comes straight from his beehive right to your table. And he also does stuff to help veterans out. So if you love honey, just let me know. All right. So now, Chris, recovery, like I said, I've been in the rooms, I think 3 years. I forgot. I stopped counting. You can't hang around, people, places, and things. And for me, I had to change my surroundings, but I had to change my habits. My friend James Clear wrote an amazing after going through that.
So I know you asked me a question. I just didn't hear the last part of it.
What steps did you take to reinvent and reimagine your life?
So for me, it was getting back into a situation where I had to be totally present and in order to survive. And so that's, again, one of the reasons why, maybe one of the primary reasons why I took on this assignment to go to Iraq and to do counterterrorism work as an advisor to the Iraqi government, the Ministry of Interior. And that put me right back into fight, and it got my head cleared. I mean, you got to be, right. It's like a whole different environment. I wasn't even able to drink over there. I know some people figured out how to do it, but for me, there was nothing but the mission and taking out these guys who were just they were a terror to the folks there in Iraq. And so that was for me. So of course that separated me from all of those things that were, that had influenced me before: the access to the drugs, the influence of people that would try and convince me to do the drugs. And so completely different change of an environment is what it took for me.
All right. So now something that really inspired me about you was something that you talk about a lot, chalk talk. And for me, I just had a friend of mine. He was a combat pilot in Afghanistan, and they did something called chair flying, which I'm really interested in, because I know that something that we don't talk about, at least not on shows that I listen to. You never hear them talk about moral injury, but this show we do. And I think sometimes if you're chalk talking or using chair flying before you go into certain, episodes, it can help alleviate some of the PTS. So talk a little bit about that chalk talk.
Yeah, well, for me, the chalk talk was a process that we used for working through complex operational issues in a response contingency. So kind of at a high level, if you've got a response to a problem that requires multiple agencies and multiple jurisdictions who aren't used to working together, what we do is we bring them together and we say, okay, let's, step one, how are you notified? Let's talk through that and let's make sure that we understand what that looks like. And step number two is how do you now mobilize the appropriate resources? And so you walk the dog through each one of these steps and a response, and then you get the person from that agency to talk to the person from that agency, and let's clarify how this is going to take place. And so for me, that was the chalk talk. But it really comes down to mental rehearsal, right? It's imagining scenarios and then developing your course of action based on what it is that you anticipate. And that's the life of an intelligence officer, that's what it's all about. Can I develop a hypothesis for a commander so that the commander can develop a course of action, how to deal with these potential, most likely, most dangerous type of scenarios that the enemy might bring to bear. And so that's the same thing I would say in life, right? It's, if I walk this path, what is it that's going to, what am I going to encounter? What harm is going to come to me? And what is my course of action? Do I even walk down that path? Maybe that's the answer, is you don't, you run from it. So this idea of mental rehearsal, I think, is a big part of it influences all of my training that I do. And it's really what I try and instill in the folks that I'm teaching. So.
Okay, so then I have a question to ask, because coming where you come from, persons used to being in control of the situation. But then as a Christian, we're taught that we surrender to him.
Right.
So how is that dichotomy between being in control and surrendering?
It is a lesson that I have struggled with. It is an idea that I have struggled with, and even recently I've struggled with this idea that I've given something to God, and then I don't see things happening in the timeline that I want, or I've done the mental rehearsal and it's not coming out the way that I thought it would. In other words, it's not my understanding. It's something else is taking place. And the lesson for me is that basically you just wasted a lot of time trying to go down that road with those actions. So an example of that would be that when I decided to retire, I realized that even though I had a pretty decent buyout from my partner, there's a part of me that is like, well, I'm not an income earner anymore. As I would say as a guy, maybe ladies would feel the same way, but I can only give you my experience, is that I felt there was a pride thing there. And when I first put some of my product out and I didn't see the response that I thought I would see, it was like, I'm going to take charge. I'm going to attack this thing. And even though I've given it to God, I started to reach out and see if folks wanted me to come work for them. It's ridiculous. And even my business partner, I reached out to him and said, maybe I should come back and we'll pick it up again where we were. And he said, man, it's like, I want you to think about that. Should God put you, because he's a believer as well. And he's a great friend. And helps me to think things through oftentimes, and which is another insight that I would share. And if you don't have somebody who is a friend in your life who can be a pillar for you when you struggle, you need that kind of person in your life. Somebody who is there to support you, who believes in you, and who's going to help you when you have these struggles, like the struggle that I was having. And he said, no, dude, you need to stick with what you are doing. You gave it to God, let God work this out. And it's like, you're absolutely right. So that's a great example, I think, of what you're talking about. We surrendered to God, I gave it to him, and then I tried to seize the initiative because I wasn't seeing it unfold the way that I had imagined it might. So.
And, like I said, I've been in recovery so many years, and I struggled with, trying to make money from helping people, because you're taught in programs, you're supposed to give it away free, but then you're also at a point where you're like, yeah, but I got to pay my light bill, So, but now I'm realizing that like Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And
Right.
I believe that I just did a post on LinkedIn before we got on that said, maybe God is closing a door because he has something better for you that he's working behind the scenes.
Right.
And, sometimes we just have to say, you know what, Lord, I'm in charge of the work. You're in charge of the result. So, and just roll with it. So, but now as we were talking earlier, you said now you're giving everything for free.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that must be totally different. So most people must be like, you're doing what? You're giving away everything. So what's that?
So my business partner and I had this conversation, my ex-business partner, I should say. And he's like, dude, you spent the time, you spent the money, you developed training. Yes, it is God's word and they can get it, but you did all of this work and now you're offering it to people. And I said, yeah, I just don't feel right though. It just doesn't feel right. And I couldn't get past that. And so, his recommendation and also some other folks that I talked to as well, just give people the opportunity to donate if they want to donate. And so we added a donation button to the website. If folks feel blessed and they want to donate, that's great. But I don't want that to be my mindset. I don't want that to be what I'm focused on. But that's a struggle, man, because, we're earners, we feel like, I'm putting in the work and I just got to keep reminding myself that, Noah built a huge boat. His payoff was God started a whole new world.
And
so,
something that you said earlier, because when I got hurt on duty and I lost my vision and the military medically discharged me, for 23 years, I was Sergeant Kaufman. Right. That's who I was. There was no Richard. It was just mission. And, when they finally told me I'm no longer Sergeant Kaufman, that was the day that I attempted suicide, Memorial Day 2012, because I didn't know who I was. Right. I never knew who Richard was. Yeah. So I totally understand what you're saying. When a lot of us, when we get out of the military, no matter if it's 5 years, 20 years, whatever, we no longer have a mission. We no longer have camaraderie. A lot of times the military doesn't give a crap about you once you step off base.
Yeah, it's all process.
Pretty much you're a man or a woman on an island alone. And then all you're left with is your memories and a pistol and maybe a bottle of whiskey.
Yeah.
So, if somebody out there listening to right now, what advice would you give them if they're struggling with mental health issues and also struggling to find out who they are?
Yeah. So I as I alluded to, I walked that path and eventually I realized my identity is as a child of God. And that's the starting point, man. You have to anchor yourself as a child of God, as a believer in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And that anchored me, back to that time in jail, showing me my sword, showing me the Eagle Globe and Anchor emblem. It's like your identity is in Christ. Having said that, if you've been through the military, you have been instilled with a warrior ethos. You've been instilled with a set of disciplines. And to now turn those disciplines back on, your identity isn't the same now, but those disciplines, that it's the internal warrior that you want to reestablish inside of yourself, not the external warrior, because all of those things that you were just talking about, Sergeant Kaufman was the external warrior. It was your identity and your rank and your uniform and where you've been and what you're doing and what your job is. But now you have the internal warrior. It's been instilled in you. It was a gift by the military, whether they realize it or not. And that you want to now reconnect those neurons in your head and the disciplines, tenacity, perseverance, endurance, all those things that got you through the time in the military. Now bring it to bear. Well, first of all, in your faith walk, right? In walking in faith and obedience and holiness, and then to your getting yourself together right? So whatever that means for you, if it's a mental issue, it's getting the help. It's a physical issue, it's going through the therapies that you need. If it's an addiction, it's getting the help that you need to break that addiction. New habits, as you said, new environment. You get yourself together, use those disciplines and pour it into getting yourself together. That's remaking yourself as a warrior. Okay? And then putting those same disciplines to bear and building your castle. You see, your marriage and your kids, if you got them, your career, bringing those disciplines to bear into your marriage and into your parenting and into your career is going to make you head and shoulders above others. And I'm not talking about yelling and screaming at people. I'm talking about those disciplines of, compassion is a discipline as well, right? And bringing that leadership to bear into your family. And then, folks, I got to tell you, there's going to come a point where you're going to want to say to the world, you're going to want to bring what you've got to the world as well. So bringing those disciplines to bear to do like what you're doing, Richard, which is helping others, right? That is a noble purpose, right? And that's where meaning comes from. And so that person who was over here who was thinking, whiskey and gun, and it's like, no, your meaning now is in front of you. You got to walk this path, make the warrior, build the castle, slay the dragons. So I think that whole idea of just kind of turning this internal warrior, this warrior ethos, and bringing it to bear to your life is what it's all about.
Wow, it's like really hitting home with me. And I tell my warriors all the time, because I people that are on the show, I call them my dream warriors, because we've protected our all the people in America to live their dreams. But something, I think that I was a tanker. That was my job. And at one point, I was in charge of 4 tanks worth $100 million each. And I forget that stuff. I forget that I was in charge. I forget a lot of the stuff that was taught me as, in the military. And I like you said, I think we have to bring that warrior mentality back to what we were taught, that we, everything we've been through, there's a reason why we've been through it. Like my mentor, Ed Milet, says, nothing happens to you, everything happens for you. Right. So, I love everything you're talking about,
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you obviously in the Bible, Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 4, this idea of putting away your old self and then putting on this new self. And then he goes in to describe kind of a code of conduct. Here's what it means to be the new self. When I look at that, it's like, I'm thinking, dude, what he's describing is kind of the same thing the military does for us. It's like when we go to boot camp, it's put away the old self. And then we adopt this new spirit, this new self. And so Paul kind of talks about it like that. And this code of conduct, in doing those things, it can be hard. It's going to require discipline. It's going to require to establish those habits that you were talking about. So then in Ephesians chapter 6, he says, now here's your armor. Here's the stuff that you need to strap on to protect you. That's going to actually bring these disciplines and these spiritual virtues to bear to help you with that walk. And so the idea of this Christ-centered new self and this warrior ethos, this armor, came together for me as this idea of a Christ-centered warrior ethos, which where you're bringing the disciplines of the warrior to bear into your faith walk. And that's got to be the foundation for all these other things that I just talked about. And it begins obviously by accepting Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, and then putting on this new self. And I kind of liken that to developing your warrior muscles, this new self, right? It's these muscles that the warrior needs. It's this idea of regular prayer, regular time in the Word, regular time in worship, regular time in fellowship, and serving others, and those types of things build these muscles. And then in Ephesians 6, you put the armor on, and the armor comes with real protection against real attacks from a real adversary that we all have to understand is out there, that's trying to take us out. But in addition to that, each piece of armor comes with what I would call spiritual virtues or spiritual disciplines. So, for example, if you talk about, a belt of truth, well, what's that all about? What's this idea that living a life of integrity, right? And being honest about yourself, being honest about the things that you're doing that you ought not to do, right? And then recognizing that if there is something that you're doing that you ought not to do, there's probably a lie. So if you want to get rid of that thing that you ought not to be doing, figure out what that lie is that is infecting your self narratives, and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to do it now, but you could go through each piece of armor, and there's these ideas of discipline that you can bring to bear that really protects you from the harm that is out there that wants to take us out. And it's a lot of that.
Last question is, how do we find you? How do we support your mission? How do we get the warrior ethos?
So it's real simple. I've got a website. It's www.noblewarriors, plural, journey, all one word, .com, noblewarriorsjourney.com. And you go there, you register, and you can take the first course, which is Making Warriors. It's the one that I have produced at this point, is available, is free. And give me feedback. Tell me, let's let's have a dialogue. Right? I got a couple of folks that are doing it right now, and we talk pretty much every day. The ideas that I presented in the course, they want a little bit of clarification. So we have kind of a community that's forming around that. So that's where you can find me.
And so, how can we support your mission other than that?
Well, I mean, if you feel blessed by it, obviously there's a donation. I haven't started a 501(c) yet.
Yeah.
Eventually I will. Again, it's like I'm building this airplane as I'm flying it, in a sense. And then everything will be tax deductible. If you want to donate, just hit the donate button, and it's simple. I am maturing in this area, so that might turn into a membership at some point. I don't know, honestly. I just want to get the information out, because I think there's a lot of people who it can help, and so that's the whole intent.
I love it. I'm saying, Chris, I'm actually, when I come back from picking up my daughter, I'm going to go check it out myself.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
I'm always looking to grow. I mean, I'm a 54-year-old man, but I got an 18-year-old brain, and I'm still trying to learn and get knowledge and get better. So, guys, as you guys know, I'm a Joel Osteen fan, and something he always says, it's my tagline, is, you can either choose to be a victim or the victor. Today I decided the three most important words in the English language. So, guys, please, if you decide you want to be a victor, go check out his course. I mean, if it's free, come on, guys, you can't get any better than free. And if it can bless somebody, tell somebody about it. Chris, exactly. Brother, thank you so much. I'm so humbled to call you friend.
Same here, Richard. I appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk about all this. This is awesome. And I really love what you're doing there.
I can't wait to check it out. Like I said, as soon as I pick up my daughter, I'm going to be logging on to, what was that website one more time?
So it's Noble Warriors, plural, journey. .com. So obviously www.noblewarriorsjourney.com.
I'm definitely going to be checking it out. And guys, you need to make sure that you're checking this out. And if you love a veteran or a first responder, please share this message with them, because they might be struggling with something they're not telling you about. All right. Chris, I love you, brother. Have an amazing week.
You too. God bless. Take care.
All right, guys, remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is up, and I will catch you next week.